Welcome to the broadcast. How you doing?
Doing good. I saw I was casting with you my first round, so I wore my Sylveon shirt.
Oh my god, I
It
actually
makes
see it.
my decisions easier. I didn't have to pick.
Oh my gosh, I should have put mine on. I wish you had told me. We could have matched.
I wanted to surprise you. I kind of forgot.
Okay, honestly, that warms my heart, and I appreciate the surprise. Hey, but it's awesome to have you here.
Oh, thank you. Excited to be here. You crossed a match the first round. Awesome games. So I'm excited to be joining too, especially because the next match, we're turning champ. So you know there's some good gameplay ahead.
Oh, for sure. We've got Polar Bear versus Kazuki for our round number 2 of the Nino PokeBros Invitational. And with that, I think comes a lot of hype. Not only, as you said, is Polar Bear the reigning champion of the Nino PokeBros Invitational, but Kazuki also an incredible player. So I think we're in for some really good action.
100%. I mean, hey, it's the Invitational. Everyone's pulling up their best. You gotta try and take that trophy home. But even with the teams in just Regulation H so far, considering we're still just a little ways out of our very first official event, I think it's really interesting to see what people are kind of running, because of course people have been hitting the ladder, people have been getting those games in, but there's a lot of innovation so far in this meta, which then is exciting diving into each match, because it's like, okay, like you get to know a little bit more about the player and like kind of what work they've been putting into it. I don't know, this regulation's been a ride so far.
It has been really fun. I mean, even just in our first round of the day, we ended up seeing Annihilate, Golden Go. I think a lot of Pokemon people were expecting to see really early on. But as we take a look at our 2 teams that we have ahead of us, we do end up having some really interesting pieces here from Polar Bear. One of another big 3, we've got King Gambit on this team. Clefable is also going to be a really big factor, having Follow Me and just being a really tanky force. But you also have Glamora, the rise of Glamora once again, with Paldean Tauros. How long has it been since we've seen a Paldean Tauros?
I think like for a glimmer of a second back in Reg A, and then we
goodbye.
I don't know. It's kind of fun that obviously there's a lot more Pokemon than we had in the original Reg A, but being able to see a couple of these Pokemon that only had longevity for like one tournament, a split second before being gone, and being like, okay, there is more here. There actually is something to explore now that we've kind of brought the power level down a little bit. So I think it's a lot of fun. You get that Intimidate. You get access to some really strong attacks. Specifically, too, this is going to be the Aqua Breed. So you get that close combat. You get that Wave Crash. And even just, like, looking at a close combat against a lot of this team, a lot of these Pokemon don't necessarily appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, on Kazuki's side, you have the Ursaluna, you have the Incineroar, as well as the Tyranitar. They're going to be taking super effective damage from that close combat. But even just being able to have Wave Crash into all 3 of those options is fantastic. Rounding out the team here for Kazuki, you have the Golden Go. As we've seen before, this is going to be the Nasty Plot set with Leftovers. And then you also have a Trick Room option with Porygon2 and Amoonguss. I think speed interaction here is going to be very important.
There are so many different little things to dive into with this match, but we actually have the game ahead of us. So we're gonna go ahead and dive into this, and I hope we get to see those little pieces come up as we go right away. Trick Room oriented kind of mode. You got that Porygon2 and that Ursaluna going up against the Paldean Tauros and the Volk. The one thing I wanted to say off the team sheet is this Ursaluna 2 with the substitute, I think is just a lot of fun.
Ooh, and with that Intimidate, you're actually going to end up getting an attack boost as well based on who you're across from. And that on the Porygon2 with the download ability is definitely not something you want. You'd rather have that special attack boost. So that is something that could potentially come into play here, as Porygon2 has access to both Terra Blast and Ice Beam as its defensive options.
I'm looking to here for this Tauros, because this is going to be a lot of offense it can dive into on this first turn. And that just forces this Terra out on the next one if you're wanting to try and go for something like this Trick Room with the Porygon2. This Porygon, by the way, you get to see a couple of different modes of where this Terra is going to be. The Porygon2 for Kazuki is going to be this fighting type, which is, I can't wait to see that little animation coming on out, but it's not going to be an attack from the Tauros. Instead, Dragonite is going to be hitting the field, as Ursaluna also will take its leave. So no Terra in that slot. Instead, so we wait for the text. That'll be the Amoonguss. Much better poised to be taking a hit. Volk, that'll be Quiver Dance for a setup.
So it's going to be a special attack boost as well as that special defense boost and speed. And so if it's going to be the Porygon2 setting up the Trick Room, that's going to be something that does hurt this Volcarona in the end, having that speed boost. Both of these Pokemon are incredibly fast, and so that is something that you're going to have to keep in mind. But with the fact that you do see this Volcarona with the Grass Terra, you could just Terrasilize away, make sure that you aren't going to actually get put to sleep with something like a Spore from the Amoonguss, and kind of go from there. This Dragonite, by the way, is also going to be the multi-scale variant, not actually inner focus. So it's something that would actually be affected by something like Intimidate as well as a Fake Out in the future.
Yeah, definitely a really good call out there. And when you do have this Amoonguss that has been swapping in, it doesn't necessarily feel safe to be going for one of these attacks on the turn. So you definitely have to be careful with how you want to be playing your cards and try and just get through this Trick Room. And the Dragonite won't be that option. That will be the swap out yet again. Be bringing the Tauros back out into the fray here. Be, intimidate, but more so what I'm looking for is if there's a Spore into that slot, it does have clear goggles, but that will be a clear smog instead into the Volcarona, getting rid of that boost with a follow-up Terra Blast to start dealing a little bit of damage. A nice participation award for that Porygon2.
Oh, but the Heat Wave, knowing that the Amoonguss is just switched in, it has to tank that. But it does have recovery available with something like the Berry. So you know that this Amoonguss can stay around for a little bit longer. And with something like the Regenerator, you could actually switch it out if you wanted to, bring in something else. But there really aren't that many pieces that would like to be on a receiving end of something like a close combat from this Tauros, or even a Wave Crash. I think that's something to certainly be cognizant of, is what can this Tauros actually do in terms of the pressure it puts onto the field, as well as the targets that it has. This Porygon2 also makes a fantastic target for something like the close combat.
I know, I keep waiting. I'm a little scared for that Porygon2 with the threat of a fighting type move over on the opposing end of the field, especially it's not necessarily dealing the most offense at that point, but the Amoonguss is going to be the one scared of a hit, not wanting to maybe get another Heat Wave. That'll be a Regenerator going out, and the Ursaluna coming back out onto the field. That's actually going to be a double pivot, so no offense coming out from Kazuki on this turn.
Ooh, but it's going to be the Incineroar that switches in, so the Intimidate drop going to help out with this Tauros damage. Maybe why we end up seeing Kazuki just a little bit more comfortable being able to bring in that Ursaluna, despite the fact that it would be taking a huge amount of damage. Close combat also going into the Incineroar with that Intimidate drop is going to allow this Incineroar to actually survive.
And the swap in there, you do get definitely more, so you can be looking at that offense on this go around, whether it's on the Heat or whatever. It's burned, so we'll be able to put a lot of pressure out onto this turn. So that's going to be something, as the Trick Room turns are kind of delving away. If you're looking to try and take advantage of that, that has to be kind of a sooner rather than later thing. And I think that Kazuki has done a great job setting up the board state, and he can get a fake out and start trying to put some offense out now.
That's why you're seeing a pivot come through here from Polar Bear. He has to consider the fact that, yes, this Ursaluna, it got a chance to actually get this Guts boost for free on the switch in, and also with taking a very minimal amount of damage. So if you are worried about being able to take advantage of those Trick Room turns, you still have a very, very healthy Ursaluna to be able to do that. Not only that, but this Ursaluna does have access to a Ghost Terra. So this close combat wouldn't be able to connect, and you're also able to actually Terrasilize away from your weakness to a Wave Crash as well. Volcarona going to protect to stall out another turn of Trick Room also makes a lot of sense.
It's going to be just a substitute coming on out instead of that offense, though. So this is going to be a lot of fun. So making sure that even once the situation kind of ends, that you do have one turn to make sure that this Ursaluna can take the most advantage of possible. Of course, it did take the damage away to be setting up that sub, and the burn is definitely on a little bit more of a timer. The King Gambit, that's going to be item. Assault Vest lost just on the switch in, but now the Protect on the Volk has been burned. The King Gambit swapped. You got the substitute for free. Sure, these Pokemon have taken a lot of damage, but this next turn, I think, is going to be pivotal. And you can't get Sucker Punch or anything either.
Yeah, the Sucker Punch would certainly be a little mute in this particular board state, but it doesn't mean that you can't necessarily go for something like a Kowtow Cleave. It's still a lot of damage. It would also help to break the substitute and allow this Volcarona to weave in just a little bit more. Sucker Punch still makes sense, though. Maybe that's going to be enough to break the sub. It's always a tough call to say, but
That's gonna be the pivotal moment. To be the Sucker Punch. It will fade. And I just woke up, so I should rephrase. The Sucker Punch won't be taking care of this Pokemon before it gets to fire off a powerful move, as that will be Facade to get rid of the Volcarona on the opposing end of the field. Now we'll be able to get a follow-up and Flare Blitz. This Incineroar likes to go back on the offensive. This new regulation is going to be super effective, so a double KO onto this turn.
that is going to be a huge swing of momentum here. Kazuki being able to take 2 knockouts is very important. And even the Incineroar actually knocking itself out in the process is not necessarily a bad thing. You can end up bringing in something else next to that Pokemon, like the Amoonguss can come back in. That might be something that you were excited to see. But you do have to worry a little bit about this fourth and final Pokemon in the back here for Polar Bear, the Dragonite, able to make a reappearance once again. It does have a lot of ways to be able to hit something like the Amoonguss for free. You have Ice Spinner as the biggest move of choice here. And not only is it going to be effective into the Amoonguss, but it would be effective into the Ursaluna as well.
We haven't seen, correct me if I'm wrong, because reiterate, just woke up, friends, but I don't believe we've seen the Terastallization coming on out. So even if
we have not,
at this point can be super threatened by something like an Ice Spinner, it is the Water Terastallization, so it would be able to take the hit so well in just going for that redirection.
That's a really great point. Absolutely. The one thing, though, is the Tauros would not be redirected from Rage Powder because of the fact that it does have the safety goggles, as you pointed out before. So you're still under some threat. Taking a look at this Ursaluna, I think that would be one thing that you would have to keep in mind, but I love that this Dragonite also has access to something like the Outrage. I think that's another move that has come back on Dragonite. You don't necessarily get a chance to pick your target, but you're able to do a lot of damage if it hits the right thing.
To see as, oh, it's clicking the Outrage, but that's going to go into the Protect instead. And barely any damage into the Amoonguss with the Wave Crash. The double up would have done so much, but with no second attack, that's going to be the Spore into the Dragonite. So it only gets to be angry and upset for 1 turn.
Oh, and then you can't even Spore the Tauros, and you can't redirect it away. So I think this Ursaluna is going to be a little bit of a predicament, but we still don't really know what Polar Bear actually has in the back to be able to tank a hit like that. And when you look at just having to take the Wave Crash, I think you can be pretty confident that the Porygon2 would be able to take that a little bit better if you expect it's going to be that super effective hit. But I think it's also fine to let the Ursaluna go down here if you can bring in the Porygon2 later.
So dependent on the 4th Pokemon that's been hidden from us so far, but I definitely agree with that. At this state, you kind of know that it's on its last legs, and it just being AO'd at this point means that you can bring it in. Well, hopefully the Dragonite has another turn of sleep. That was its first turn right there. So it is at risk, danger, at the benefit, depending on who you're talking about, being able to wake up anytime, as that's going to be the Porygon, the download. And sorry, I cannot count. This is the final Pokemon.
I messed that up first. That's my fault.
Bro, I'm struggling out here today. The Porygon's here. Hey, if we want to see some damage coming on out, to see if we can maybe get it here. Again, no Terastallization as of yet.
No, and I think that's where you could be in a really good spot here, just knowing that you have the fighting type, but you also have Ice Beam. And the fact that the download the second time around did give you a special attack boost means that that Ice Beam is going to actually do way more damage. And so both of these Pokemon are going to have to be able to watch out for that, but the Dragonite, more importantly, has to wake up first.
That'll definitely be the biggest thing, is Terastallization finally in this match. We've been holding off on this one for absolutely forever. And yes, it is going to be the fighting type onto this Porygon2. So it will be the fighting type attacks. Not necessarily going to be the most useful when you're staring at the Dragonite on the other end of the field, which is the one unfortunate part of that. but being able to start maybe dishing out into the Tauros, which is definitely a big issue at this point. It gets to fire off this Wave Crash first into it. The Porygon2 is so bulky, so you got to start chipping away. Dragonite staying asleep. Definitely going to be to Kazuki's benefit, as that will be the Trick Room to make sure going on forward that you can have dimensions on your end to keep trying to be pushing these other two Pokemon, the last two for both trainers.
Yeah, this is just going to be a forfeit. I think you could also consider this game to be in a really difficult spot. Wave Crash, maybe Crit is able to help bring this Porygon 2 fairly low, but you still have to actually be able to knock it out at some point. And this Porygon 2 does have access to recover. So under Trick Room, if you recover now, you're going to be back up to full, and then you can still threaten with those ice beams as well as those Terra-fighting Terra Blasts. So Dragonite really not in a good spot here. It's going to be taking super effective from something.
It's all depending on what call you want to be making, because if you're expecting the Ice Beam on this turn and want to be going for the Terastallization, it means that the next go around, well, it can just be the Terra-fighting Terra Blast, but making the call and hoping for a wake-up, that'll be the Terastallization into that normal type. So as long as it's an Ice Beam on this turn, you're not going to be taking the super effective damage from that move, as the Tauros will opt to protect to make sure that you can try and have a Pokemon surviving. It's going to be a wake-up that I'm eyeing up, but you need to wake up sooner rather than later, because you need to start dealing some offense. Pollen Puff into the Porygon2 will do so much, and that will be the Terra Blast instead. No Ice Beam into the Terra Normal Dragonite to take it down.
What a call! That was a crazy read. I still think you're doing a pretty good amount of damage regardless, but the fact that you ended up Terraing away, that is actually going to be the forfeit this time around, because it is over.
I'm so excited. We got
what a call!
Porygon2 with that fighting Terra. Just go all out offensive. Great way to be ending that. I think with the board state you had built up, that we wouldn't have seen this screen eventually, but being able to have that be the kind of the capstone of the match, I think was awesome. And I think it was kind of interesting, because when you look down at these final two Pokemon of kind of like an Amoonguss and a Porygon2, sometimes they can kind of struggle a little bit with that offense, but being able to go back up for that Trick Room, the really good turns on getting that one Spore onto that Dragonite before having the Ursaluna, which would have been more so the damage dealer going down. So you didn't have to worry too much with those final two Pokemon. Be able to set back up at the Trick Room was great. So I'm curious how this is going to be swapped around. That Dragonite had definitely a lot of struggle in that last match, so I don't necessarily know if that'll be one that we get to see again.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if maybe you end up bringing something like the Clefable. Even just having your own form of redirection means that you would be able to take a couple of attacks. If it ends up being the terrifying Terra Blast Porygon at the end of the day, you know that Clefable is going to be able to follow me those away, actually take resisted damage, and be in a pretty good spot there. But otherwise, I think you have to assume that Kazuki's going to try to get the Trick Room up again and again. Just knowing that the Pokemon overall are going to be on a bit of a slower side, you know that the speed is going to be one way that you can really start to get things going on Kazuki's team.
This one's definitely a little easier to say as kind of the armchair warrior over here, but even just looking back to a couple of turns and how long it took for both players, but specifically Kazuki, when there was things that would have taken a lot of damage from a close combat, to be clicking the Terra button, I feel like even just like a well-timed double up into something like that Porygon2, because that Porygon2 got the Trick Room up on the very first turn and could have been susceptible to at least trying to get some more damage from the get-go. Maybe a couple of those heads-up calls to kind of take momentum of the match, as opposed to letting that Trick Room be the thing that kind of dictates that pace and kind of having to go on the defensive from that point on with the offensive tools. So want to hopefully see some more damage dished out in this next one, but as we get into it, see what hits the field yet again. A little bit of a switch, and Sin and Amoonguss to be starting off going up against the Vulcan, the Tauros.
Okay, so very interesting to see both of these Pokemon lean. Instead, a little bit more passive coming through from Kazuki. You still have the opportunity to go for something like the Fake Out, and the Intimidate drop onto the Tauros is certainly going to help limit some of its damage output. But the fact that there isn't any Trick Room as an option on the field means that this Volcarona may be a little bit safer to actually go for some type of setup. The biggest problem here is that you do see this Incineroar able to go for something like a knockoff, and it was trying to go into the Toro slot in game number 1. You would have loved to be able to get the knockoff into the safety goggles. Didn't end up mattering at the end of the day, but it still would have made the end game in that game 1 much easier.
Yeah, it would put so much pressure, but knock off into the Dragonite. No choice band, so that's going to be damage a lot less, but it does mean that once you wake up, you can switch between your moves instead of being locked into one. The answer is when you wake up, because Dragonite going to sleep on the first turn hurts just a little bit, especially too since it was a safety goggles in that slot that then swapped out, so oof.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because I think that is always a very safe play for Kazuki to go for, because either you're going to get the sleep onto the Tauros, which is a really big threat for your team, or yeah, you get it into whatever is switching in, and that could be like the Dragonite's a really bad option, King Gambit as well. You knock off the Assault Vest and you make it a little bit easier for something maybe like the Golden Go to actually get in there. But the Dragonite specifically, you gotta wake up on this first turn.
At this point, just going on the offensive with this Volcarona, I think fantastic. Get as much damage as you can into this Amoonguss and get rid of this pesky Amoonguss. These spores, and now getting rid of that, getting this Dragonite to sleep has been so annoying. That'll be the first turn of sleep, so at this point, it can wake up at any time, but knock off into the Volk is just going to be getting rid of that Covert Glow for later on, and everything's going to sleep. This Amoonguss needs to be dealt with.
I mean, you would think that maybe the Heat Wave burn onto the Amoonguss would help out a little bit, because at least it puts it on some type of timer, but it still has Regenerator, can still switch off the field, get full HP back, and because Volcarona didn't actually terrestrialize, it does get put to sleep on that turn. Polar Bear at this point needs to buy enough time to actually be able to tank some of these hits and get these Pokemon to wake up. With this Incineroar being a little bit more offensive this time around too, with something like the Flare Blitz, Volcarona isn't necessarily going to like that. Dragonite can take that though just a little bit better. And now that knockoff has gone into both targets, you're still not going to be doing very much because the items are gone. So maybe you do have a little bit of time that you've bought yourself to actually be able to wake up here.
Well, it'll be a pivot first. The Incineroar is gone. All the items have been knocked off. There's nothing else here. And Porygon2 rejoining the field. And that will be the double pivot. I think this is going to be quite smart with the fact that the Volk has to be sleeping. The Dragonite, even if it wakes up, it's lost its choice band, and you want to make sure you can switch out, get the Regenerator. I think this is just a great call for it, as that will be another turn of sleep. This has got to be so frustrating as well to have all these Pokemon sleep, and it's all just momentum on the other side. The swap in on that turn 2 into the Ursaluna means that instantly you get that Flame Orb activation, you're instantly burned to get access to all of this damage.
I don't know why people are saying Incineroar is a little fraudulent in this regulation, because I think it's definitely been putting in the work. Knowing that it has access to 2 attacks this time around means that it does have the opportunity to go on the offense with a stab, flare blitz, stab knockoff, and really just make sure that Kazuki's in the driver's seat. This Ursaluna has time to move. Like, I don't even think that it necessarily needs to be in be in Trick Room. It already has the Flame Orb boost as well to activate Guts. Dragonite, though, like, it can go for Ice Spinner, but you still have Terra. And also, Dragonite could just not wake up.
Well, that's going to be the Volk taking another snooze, and the Dragonite, a real sleepy boy today, is going to be sleeping yet again. And was a couple of different options for the Ursaluna. Could have seen the substitute, so once things woken up, they still couldn't start dealing with anything. But just the straight facade into the Volk is going to be getting rid of this Pokemon as Trick Room gets set up from this Porygon2. And this has been a tough one. Now, looking at both of these Pokemon coming on in, I mean, not going to necessarily appreciate the hits on out and don't necessarily appreciate the speed.
No, I mean, you're just going to be faster with the Ursaluna and Trick Room than most of the other things that we do have on Polar Bear's team. But the Intimidate, being able to bring that in, certainly can help. Maybe even in an opportunity here to force out a Terra from this Ursaluna. But, oh, it's so tough. At least you're not intimidated right now if you're the Tauros, but it's still an opportunity to just bring in the Amoonguss and, or sorry, the Incineroar and do it again.
You're really scraping at the bottom of the cookie jar for a positive in the situation. Like, at least not intimidated. But at least if there is the Terra and with the not being intimidated, if you go for the Wave Crash into the Ursaluna, even if it does go for the Terastallization, that is still going to be a nice little, like, it's going to be a lot of damage. You're going to have the same type attack bonus as well. Wave Crash is just a lot of damage. So definitely something to be looking forward to. And the other positive is the Dragonite should be waking up this turn if it gets to that point. So
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that just going for something like a priority move is certainly one way that you can bypass a lot of these speed interactions in Trick Room, but that is a terrestrialization onto the Porygon. Good for you, Dragonite. You got the wake up finally.
it's not going to be too great for long, but that's going to be just that headlong rush into the one slot, covering for whatever wants to come on in. If that was the King Gambit that hits the field, a lot of damage. And if it sticks around, well, the Ice Beam is going to deal with that. Or sorry, even if it was the Terastallization, you get to cover both kind of angles of that. The Tauros does get to do a lot of damage. The fight isn't going to be not quite enough, even past that burn, be picking it off.
Oh, so the Ursaluna is around for one more turn of Trick Room. The only thing is that there's another priority move on the table. There's actually two right now. Tauros has the Aqua Jet, which would be able to pick off this Ursaluna, and this Sucker Punch from the King Gambit, absolutely. But you still have to worry about this King Gambit in the face of this Terra-fighting Terra Blast Porygon. This King Gambit does have a Fire Terra, but you have to worry about dealing with this Ursaluna.
Yeah, especially too with the Ursaluna, it does have Protect. So even if you try to sucker into it, there's a swap on the other end. It protects, and then you just like the potential of that redirection the next go around. But I think at this point, when you're down to the final two and there is this big threat, that making the call can sometimes be absolutely everything, as it will be the Terastallization forced out to make sure this Porygon2 cannot be even more terrifying than it already has been in this match.
Well, I really like the opportunity to protect because you have a Pokemon that can do that. You're stalling out another turn of Trick Room, and this Tauros is certainly something that is going to cause a problem for a lot of Kazuki's team. And with the Sucker Punch as well, you're going to guarantee that you get the knockout onto the Ursaluna, but if it protects, you also know that you're going to be safe. Something like this Terra-fighting Terra Blast, knowing that you have pivoted away from that 4 times weakness. That would have been quite bad.
Yeah, so thank goodness for the Terastallization button. King Gambit's going to be taking that hit so much better. And the Ursaluna, this massive amount of damage, is going to be gone. Amoonguss rejoins the field, and this is where things yet again get a little scary, because the Amoonguss, we saw how much pressure these spores put on before, and yeah, that's exactly how we're going to be starting off that turn. The King Gambit, sure, maybe it didn't take too much damage the last time, but now we won't be able to dish out any either, as the Porygon2, yet again, firing off these Terra Blasts. And that's a decent little amount into the Tauros. It doesn't quite pick up the KO. The Tauros will have an opportunity to act on this turn. Close combat into the Amoonguss, though, is not going to be the damage that you necessarily needed.
No, it's not. And with that special defense drop as well, even if you're going to take something like an Ice Beam, you're probably going down to it. This King Gambit, oh, it's so tough because you do have a little bit of time to actually wake up here. Taking your mandatory sleep turn already gives you a potential to do that on this next turn. But you're starting to be in a little bit of a spot. Thank goodness though that this King Gambit still has its Assault Vest. It's why it's been able to take these attacks from this Porygon2 a little bit better. And Incineroar's in the back as well. You don't want to give over Defiant Boost, but that's what Polar Bear is hoping for.
I'm just looking even at this Porygon2 to where the damage can be really coming out to actually fully deal with it, because it's King Gambit. I mean, it's not going to be hitting it for the most amount of damage. Porygon2 is pretty bulky. And then there is this Amoonguss as well that can just be Polypuffing to be bringing it back up, as the Porygon2 slowly but surely deals with the team. The attempt hit into their sack, another round at the Terra Blast, into this King Gambit. Again, slowly but surely.
That's getting whittled away, but it does wake up on this turn. So going for the Kowtow Cleave, knowing that this Amoonguss just needs a little bit more damage, that should be able to get picked up with one more Kowtow Cleave. But I don't think the Wave Crash is going to do it. Trick Room is over though, so it does allow
Right.
for this King Gambit and this Tauros to be faster. This Tauros is so low though, it's going to go down to a little wind.
At least though, I just counted the turns. I thought there was the one more turn. So this is where just trying to get that amount of damage could be absolutely huge. The one thing that kind of sucks is there is still a third Pokemon in the back there that Incineroar that could be trying to come on out and make an appearance to get an Intimidate. But if you do, you need to make sure this King Gambit is dealt with. So deal with the King Gambit or come out, still have more options. If the Tauros wants to go for a close combat and you don't pick up the KO, you could lose it on this turn. But we'll see that into this Amoonguss instead. Still not enough for that KO.
Oh, but I love being able to go for the Iron Head here on the King Gambit. You're hoping to get a flinch so that this Trick Room cannot get set up again, or you just aren't going to be taking damage. This Terra Blast, though, ooh, poor Tauros.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a tough one. Tauros is gone, and now there was no flinch. Spore, mean on out. The King Gambit not doing nearly enough in that turn, and now yet again we fall into that same pattern. That's going to be burned to not quite pick up the Amoonguss quite yet, but you know if it doesn't swap out, it will be taken down at the end of this next turn. But even if there is an Incineroar that can be activating that Defiant, you're in the situation now where I think you're in such control of the match. Even if you don't want to go on the offensive, even if you just go for the Trick Room, you can really kind of play around with the situation at this point. You just have so many pieces.
Yeah, I don't think you mind giving over a Defiant Boost at this point because, as you said, King Gambit is just the final piece. You are going to have to take a mandatory turn of sleep here, which allows for this Porygon2 to actually get a Terra Blast. You get a chance to fake out this King Gambit after that's over, and that should be enough. I think fake out plus the Terra Blast should be able to pick up this King Gambit here.
Yeah, that'll be the double up as yet again. It doesn't. It won't even matter. That's just gonna be another turn of that sleep anyways. You're done kind of either way. That's gonna be the Terra Blast to be putting the final nail in the coffin to take down this King Gambit for a 2-0 match. With how long this second match went, it kind of seemed like we did do a 3-game series. These games definitely took their time, considering it was the Porygon2 and the Amoonguss being the big pieces, but still, it was really, really well done with how like the entire thing was manipulated. So, I mean, Polar Bear from the get-go was kind of so many options taken away, even just from that first turn with the knockoff in that Spore.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just knowing that you have those pieces, it's always very safe to go for something like the knockoff there. And if you get the sleep onto the Taurus, fantastic. And then the poor Dragonite, it just took.
Poor Dragonite.
Oh, yeah, it was having a hard time this morning. Maybe just like us a little bit. But hey, fantastic stuff. Congratulations to Kazuki. That is going to be an undefeated record so far, 2-0. Still a lot of Pokemon to play out, though, and Polar Bear not down for the count just yet. The X2 record is going to be what takes you to the end.
Yeah, and even if we couldn't necessarily tell it from that set of games because of, you know, the constant Spore pressure, what can you really get to show off with your team in that case? This is quite a strong team. Like that Paldean Tauros, there's tools like the Volcarona, and the King Gambit have just been so strong in Regulation H. So this definitely is a team that I think is very, very capable. I think, though, if Kazuki's just brought the perfect team that can kind of whittle away options, that there's someone we'll get to see quite later on. This should be a pretty good run ahead of them.
Well, we are going to be getting ready for the next round of Swiss at the Nino PokeBros Invitational. So we are going to be taking a short break. When we come back, we will have that round number 3 and see what other surprises are in store for us for Regulation H. See you guys soon.